So, security documents. You've got a policy, and then procedures, standards, guidelines, and baselines. And these all are different levels of documents that control your security. The policies are the overview and generalization from the top, with general strategic plan to assign responsibilities, specify requirements, enforcement policies, and acceptable risk levels. And this is the proof that senior management has exercised due care. All right, and so your policy is the overarching document. Then you have lower levels of policies, and specific ones like regulatory, issue specific, and so on at lower levels. So the organizational policy will consider every aspect of an organization. The issue specific one will be one particular thing like privacy or email, and you might have system specific policies referring to things like a firewall, a particular system. There's regulatory policies, which are compliance with industry or legal standards. You must obey them or there will be fines or punishments. Advisory policies are recommendations, and that's what most policies are, not absolutely enforced. And then there's informative policies, just to provide useful information. Processes are a series of steps and actions to receive an end, like the process to process a payment or to enter an order, that sort of thing. And those lead to procedures, which are detailed step-by-step instructions. And this is why we have the genre of cop shows on TV, police procedurals, where what they show is police going through all their procedures to investigate a crime. And the same thing applies to procedures at companies. And standards are compulsory requirements where you specify we're going to use McAfee antivirus, never anything else, and everybody will use the same version of it. So we have organization. This is generally very common because your IT department doesn't want to support a whole bunch of different software. So typically they standardize on something like the Microsoft version of everything, so it's easier to control. And then there's guidelines, which are recommendations how to meet these standards, not compulsory. And there's baselines. Baselines are a measurement of the current state of your system, so you can decide whether it needs to be improved or how it compares to that measurement later. All right, this is a reference, a state of your system. So let's take a look at more Cahoots. 1F is here. All right, where are the step-by-step instructions? Those are the procedures. All right, what's the most common type of policy? Advisory. They're usually not compulsory. They're recommendations. And what policy enforces compliance with industry or legal standards? Those are the regulatory policies. All right. All right, one more section of these, and that's it for today. So business continuity, this is a big issue. You have to plan how you're going to survive during a disaster, something like a fire or a flood. So you have a long-term plan how you're going to make it through this. And this is the umbrella plan, the business continuity plan, that includes other plans inside it, like the disaster recovery plan. This is a short-term plan that deals with specific disruption, like a malware outbreak. You do this by performing a business impact analysis, which determines how long you can live without certain assets. And you identify your critical assets, and then you do a risk analysis of those critical assets. For example, City College, our website is not really necessary. It's necessary to register for classes and such, but if it went down for a day or two, it wouldn't really matter. The classes would continue. Whereas for Google, that's not acceptable. Their whole business is the website. So you make a plan. Here's the National Industry Standards Plan. You develop contingency planning, business impact analysis. You identify preventive controls, then contingency strategies, how you're going to survive without the thing that went down. Make a contingency plan, then you test, train, and have exercises with the plan, and then you have maintenance. You, of course, have to keep updating the plan because you keep changing your computer layouts and such, and you have to adapt your plan, and also you keep changing your personnel, and part of the plan is assigning which personnel have which duties. So you got personnel security policies. There's a lot of these. You should be screening candidates for employment, and once you do hire people, you make them sign agreements like non-disclosure agreements, acceptable use policy, code of conduct, conflict of interest, and ethics. These are all things you want to inform your staff about and enforce it. So you onboard them with orientation and provisioning them with things like company laptops, and then when they leave, you have to have offboarding, where you have an exit interview and make sure they're not taking company knowledge or company devices out with them. Job rotation is one technique to try to prevent your employees from stealing from you. What you do is you rotate people from one job to another, and that way one person can't become irreplaceable, and if that one person was doing something fraudulent, the new person substituting for their job might detect what they're doing. Separation of duties is another technique where you do not let one person do a critical thing. I worked at a financial company for years, and every time money was sent out in checks, no one person could do that. One person had to prepare it, and another person had to review it to make sure it was right before you sent out the money, and that's what you do. That's separation of duties. Two people have to work together on a critical activity. So they can't commit fraud unless they have collusion and make a conspiracy, and that's more difficult. So risk management concepts, you have a circle here. You determine what your assets are, then you determine what dangers they're exposed to and what safeguards are going to protect them. You consider the people that might attack you. Those are the threat agents. The threats are the bad things that might happen. The vulnerabilities are the weaknesses that might allow that threat to harm you. And the risks is the measurement quantitatively of how much real harm you would experience from that. And you can go around a cycle here, improving your defenses. So that's risk analysis. Your assets are the valuable things you're protecting. A threat is a bad thing that might happen. A vulnerability is a weakness. And so risk is a measure of how much damage you'd get from a bad thing happening. So it's threat times vulnerability. For example, they point out in your book, the earthquake risk is the same in Boston and San Francisco. Now, in San Francisco, we have much more earthquakes, but the buildings are built to withstand them. In Boston, they have very few earthquakes, but the buildings are not built to handle it, so the risk amounts to about the same. And so the impact is the severity of the damage in dollars. And unless you are the military, you can't plan to spend human life, so you consider that infinite. You really don't want to be killing people. And so you have, often you can't get a dollar amount, but you just have sort of a high, medium, and extreme. So things that are likely to happen, things that are unlikely to happen, and how much harm they do. Things that are likely to happen but have a very small amount of damage are a low risk. That's the plan here. Things that are likely to happen and have catastrophic effect, those are your highest risk, extreme risk. And the lowest risk are things that are rare and wouldn't matter much if they did happen. So, asset value, this is the only math in the CISSP. The asset value is how much an asset is worth. The exposure factor is how much the asset would be lost if the bad thing happened. So if you think of something like a company car, you might get in an accident, maybe that would lower the car's value by half. Then that's how much you'd lose from one incident that you're worried about. You figure out how many of those are going to happen per year, and that's your annualized loss expectancy, how many dollars per year you expect to lose from that threat. And then you can compare that to how much a countermeasure would cost, like insurance, and decide whether it's worth purchasing or not. So total cost of ownership, something Microsoft likes to talk about, but it also applies to mitigating safeguard. If you decide to implement something like two-factor authentication, that's going to cost you money to implement it, and it's going to cost you maintenance. More people calling in for password resets and so on. So you figure out how much it's really going to cost to implement that security measure, and then compare it to how much real loss you're going to have for not implementing it, and that's how you decide whether it's worth doing. So that's the return on investment, the amount of money saved. So if the total cost of ownership is less than the annualized loss expectancy, then you have a return on investment. The control you buy is worth it because it prevents harm that is greater. The problem is all these things are typically estimates. So here's what you can do when you have a risk. You can accept it, you can mitigate it, which is implementing some kind of control to lower the risk. You can transfer it to somebody else by outsourcing part of your business or getting insurance, or you can avoid the risk by changing your business practices so you no longer do the risky thing. Quantitative is what you would like if you could really boil things down to dollars, but typically all you can get is qualitative, like high, medium, and low, to approximate the level of risk. And so here's the NIST risk management framework. You categorize your systems, then you select security controls, then you implement them, then you assess to see how well they work, then you have monitoring to see how well they're working and go around in a loop here. All right. And so here's types of controls, access control types. Preventive controls prevent something. You can't do it, like limited privileges. You don't have administrative rights, therefore you can't install software. That's it. The control stops you. Detective controls just monitor what you do but don't prevent it, like video surveillance. Corrective controls correct a damaged system, like an antivirus removing a suspicious file. And recovery controls restore functionality after an incident, like restoring from backups. Deterrent controls scare away attackers. They don't actually prevent something, but they're intended to scare away attackers so they'll give up. Compensating controls are a control to compensate for weakness in another control. So as I mentioned, you might review logs to detect violations of the computer use policy, and that's what you have to do for high privilege accounts. You review what they've been doing, because you don't really have a technical control to stop them from doing bad things, so you have to review their actions to see if they're violating your security policy. So administrative controls are just regulations or rules from management. Technical controls are hardware or software, technical things that prevent you from doing things like firewalls and access control lists, and then of course physical controls like locks and security guards and such. When I was young and an IT worker, I thought technical controls were where it's at and administrative controls were useless. And then I was confronted with the Apple iOS store. iPhones are your safest computing platform, and they're safe because of administrative controls. The reason an iPhone is safe is because you can't install arbitrary software. You can only install software from the Apple Store, and that's safe not because they have an antivirus product that's strong, but because of administrative controls. You can't put anything in the store without giving them your real name, and if you ever put a bad thing in the store, they throw you out and you can never sell any more apps again, and that administrative punishment is so extreme that almost nobody puts any malware in the App Store. So that administrative control is extremely effective, and it makes iPhones into a very safe computing environment. So you have threat modeling, where you try to plan for your threats. You can either focus on applications or assets or attackers, all different ways to do it. You identify the threats, then you look at your countermeasures, look at vulnerabilities, prioritize the risks, and decide what new countermeasures might be needed to lower the risk. And Microsoft had invented the STRIDE framework to organize types of attacks. Spoofing is pretending to be a different user, like an administrator. Tampering is modifying data you're not supposed to modify. Repudiation is doing something and then being able to deny that you did it because you're able to delete the logs or somehow avoid them. Information disclosure is revealing confidential information. Denial of service is bringing down servers so they do not provide service to the authorized users. And elevation of privilege is moving from a user account up to an administrator account. And these are various things attackers might do, and there are other modeling tools that try to organize types of threats here. And so this is STRIDE, PASTA, Trike, and VAST showing various ways they are used to model attackers. Just try to organize your thinking around the kinds of attacks that might come in. And so then there are risks in the supply chain. This is a huge issue, and I'm on Pulse Security Weekly podcast. We've been talking about this for the last couple of years. Ever since the SolarWinds attack, which was when Russia hacked a company called SolarWinds, and they compromised their software development process, so an authorized update from the company included Russian malware. So all these American companies were owned by Russia when all they did was put on an authorized signed update from the real manufacturer of the software they were using. This has terrified people, and they're very, very concerned. How can you possibly protect yourself? You put on signed updates from a company like Microsoft, but if you can't trust them, what can you do? And we're all worrying about this. How do you deal with third-party risks and risks in the supply chain? It is currently largely an unsolved problem. Right now, what the government is doing is forcing everyone to make software bill of materials where you list all the libraries used in your product, so we can decide if those libraries are safe. But right now it's in its infancy, and it's not helping us much yet. But people are becoming aware of how risky it is to use software that relies on libraries written by somebody else you don't control, which is basically all software. All software uses libraries, and they ultimately come from other countries you don't trust and so on. So it's a big problem, and we're just in the very early stages of trying to get a handle on it. Anyway, here's the last Kahoot. There's a low number. We're special. All right, a warning sign. What is that going to do? it's a deterrent. It might scare away some people, but it's not actually going to prevent bad things from happening. All right, how about an electrified fence? That's preventive. That'll stop people from climbing over it. All right, how about a security camera? That's technical control. It's a piece of technology to provide a level of security. It's a detective control. It's a detective technical control. All right, how about an acceptable use policy? That's a administrative control. Good. If a risk has a high likelihood and a low impact, what should you do? You should accept it. Just letting it happen is probably the best answer. Mitigating is probably not justified if it has a low impact. All right, you have 100 cars worth $50K each, and employees wreck 1% of them each year. So what is the annualized loss expectancy? All right, 50K, that's 1% of the cars. All right, so all right, so I'm going to stop the recording.